Hi, this is John Perkins.
Hi, I'm Craig Bell. In 1994, the New York Times reported that Quaker Oats Company had posted strong financial earnings for several years and decided to purchase Snapple drinks. Snapple was the leader in beverages like fruit drinks and iced teas, and they wound up paying $1.7 billion to buy Snapple. A few years later, due to the disaster of that decision, Snapple had tanked and Quaker had to announce a net loss of $1.1 billion, and they could only sell Snapple for $300 million at that point. In April of 1997, the chairman and CEO of Quaker Oats had to resign, who had promoted the decision to buy Snapple. That's a bad decision.
Yes.
Billion with a B, John. What a loss. Whew. We're talking about those bad decisions today that we make on Take 5.
Food for the soul, helping you to thrive. 5 minutes to renew your mind. Take 5.
You know, John, as bad as that decision would have been for Snapple and for Quaker Oats, the pinnacle of bad decision making has got to be Adam and Eve, right?
Yes, Genesis chapter 2, verse 16 and 17. And the Lord God commanded the man, saying, Of every tree of the garden thou may freely eat, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil thou shalt not eat. For in that day that thou eatest, therefore thou shalt surely die. So God put it plainly, you can eat of any tree of the Garden of Eden, but there's one tree in the midst, the knowledge of good and evil, that tree thou shalt not eat, because the day that there does, thou shalt surely die.
Right. And in the midst of all those good trees, according to chapter 3, verse 22, it included the tree of life.
Yes.
So they had the tree of life at their disposal, as well as every other fruit tree that was there. But the only one was forbidden was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil.
And you talked about that tree of life. If they would have ate of that, they would have lived forever. That was the tree of life. But they chose, rather than to eat of the tree of life, they ate of the tree of death. That Jesus said, "At the day that you eat thereof, you will surely die."
So imagine, John, as they walk through the garden and they pass these beautiful fruit trees, all of these options, and they hone in on the one that they couldn't have.
Yes. And Satan was right in the midst of that decision. The peer pressure of Satan, the peer pressure of having an option. You could do all these, but God says you shouldn't. And he says in chapter 3 and verse 3, but the fruit of the tree of that's in the midst of the garden, God had said, ye shall not eat, neither you shall touch it, lest you shall die. And the serpent said unto the woman, you shall surely not die. Then he goes on, he says, but God will know, your eyes will be open, you'll become as gods, knowing good from evil. So he put that temptation out there. You can eat of all these trees, but this one, the one that God said not to eat of, but you won't surely die.
Right. And John, I don't know how close the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil were to each other, but perhaps they walked past this tree of life to go eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil that they were told not to eat from. Two trees, life and death, and they chose the tree of death.
And after they did, God had to put angels to protect the tree of life, that they couldn't go and eat of that tree anymore.
Aren't you glad we're smarter than that today, John? I mean, look at our options, life and death. And yet today, we're still choosing death. We haven't changed a bit, have we? Our society would choose death over life all day long.
Yes. In Deuteronomy, in chapter 30, and verse 19, it says, I have called heaven and earth to record this day against you, that I have set before you life and death, blessings and cursing. Therefore, choose life, that both thou and thy seed may live. Still today, we got that choice. Do we want to choose God, or do we want to choose the devil? Do we want to choose the tree of life or the tree of death?
So right before us today, life and death is given to us as a choice.
Yes.
Reminds me of what Joshua told the people in Joshua, chapter 24, verse 15. If it seem evil unto you to serve the Lord, which I can't imagine that, but yet today it does seem evil to people to be Christian, to be godly people. But if it seem evil to you to serve the Lord, choose this day whom you will serve, whether the gods which your fathers served that were on the other side of the flood, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. So it really matters, John, what we decide. And we challenge you to choose life and not death today. Somebody said it may be true that there are two sides to every question, but it is also true that there are two sides to a sheet of fly paper. And it makes a big difference on which side the fly chooses to land on. So before you make that choice today in your spiritual life, choose wisely.